Hi, bring you our discussion on public procurement. This is our concluding discussion on some of the relevant issues and public procurement in Ghana. This particular lecture video, we shall be focusing on how to seek redress if you are not pleased with the process of the procurement. Then also we look at how to dispose public goods, the various types of goods or services that we can dispose of, and the means or the procedures that we can use to dispose them. So we'll begin by looking at the procedure that involves that we use to put up what do you call it, or what we call complaints and procedures. So let's look at that now. A complaint in the first instance. So the right. Let's look at the right to complain. That's the first thing. Take note of that. So the under the Act, there are two types of issues that usually you may have to engage. The first is called the complaints, and those are what we call administrative review. So take note of that. So the right you have to put up a complaint under the Act, it takes two forms. We call it the complaint, and the second one is called administrative review. So let's know what is the difference between a complaint and an administrative review. A complaints are those applications that are made to the head of the procurement entity from whom you had, or that particular entity who you had applied for the particular tender that you wanted to have for yourself. So the complaint, that is the first one, is directed to the head of the procurement entity, whereas the administrative review may be made to the board of the PPA. So these are the two channels you have. You either put up a complaint to the head of the procurement entity or an administrative review to the board of the PPA. So an appeal against the complaint decision may be made by the procurement entity, or when the decision is made after the complaint, you can make your appeal against that complaint decision to the board of the PPA. And then also where you want to make an appeal against the administrative review of the PPA board, you may also seek that redress from the court of law. So if you look at it, two main means by which you could seek redress. You can either go by complaint, where you write an application to the head of the procurement entity, or you use the administrative review, which is usually you write to the board of the public procurement authority. Where you have not been satisfied with the decision of the complaint, you could seek the redress through the board, through the administrative review. But where the board's review is not acceptable to you, you could also seek redress via the court of law. So please take note of this particular process. It's very technical, so we must make sure you understand it. Now, let's look at the complaint procedure. So as we are all aware, the complaint is to the head of the procurement entity. So in the first instance, you submit it in writing to the head of the procurement entity if the procurement contract has not already been entered into force. So correspondence pertaining to any complaint should be copied to the board of the PPA. Now, when the procurement entity receives the application of the complaint from the supplier or contractor or consultant, the entity should take steps to bring the contract into force. Should take steps not to should not take steps to bring the contract into force when they receive the complaint within the time limit stipulated, where the notice of application of administrative review from the board have been received, and where there's a notice of application to or an appeal from the court of law. So the public entity that is being complained against should not take steps to bring the contract into force when they have a complaint lodged against them, either when they receive it within the stipulated time, or there's an administrative review against them, or there's also a court issue against them. So they should take steps not to bring the contract into force. So please take note of this process when you talk about the complaint procedure. So the complaint procedure, usually, as I said, a written letter to the head of the procurement entity. Now, for the procurement procedure, when the procurement entity should not attempt, most of the time, to resolve the complaint by mutual agreement, which is always advised so that it doesn't escalate. So the head of the procurement entity must, within 21 days after the submission of the complaint, issue a written decision. And that decision shall state the reason for the decision they made earlier. If the complaint is upheld in whole or part, indicate any corrective measures that could be taken to correct it. Now, if the head of the procurement entity does not issue a decision by the time stipulated, okay, what will happen is that the complainant may seek an administrative review. He's entitled to that. And that, as I said, shall be initiated with the board of the Public Procurement Authority. So let's look at administrative review. So this is presided over by the board, and the contractor may seek a review, may submit it officially by complaining to the board. And they only do so when the head of the procurement entity does not entertain the complaint because the procurement contract has been entered into force. So most of the time, when you write to the procurement entity and they've already sent out or given approval to the entity which has won the bid, they may not entertain your complaint. Then also where the supplier or the consultant claim to have been adversely affected by the decision of the head of the procurement entity. So what are the rules for filing? The petition should be submitted, 21 days after, number one, the supplier becomes aware of the circumstances giving rise to the complaint, or the time when the contractor ought to have become aware of these circumstances. If the supplier cannot be submitted or the complaint cannot be submitted because of the entry into force of the procurement contract. So upon receipt, the board will give notice to the complainant promptly, exactly, and as well as the procurement entity. So the rules of filing is, as I said, two of them. When you become aware of the circumstances that is giving rise to the complaint, or when the time you wanted to file the complaint, you became aware of the circumstances, exactly. And if submitted, exactly, it will not be taken seriously because the procurement entity has already entered or has put into force the contract that was signed. So these are the rules for filing. And as I said, upon receipt, the board will notify the procurement entity accordingly. Then let's go ahead. What are the actions available to the board after receiving the administrative review? They have so many things to do. They may declare the legal rules or principles that govern the subject matter of the complaint. They may order that the provisions of the Act be complied with. They may require the procurement entity that has acted or proceeded in an illegal manner. They may also reach an illegal decision to act or to proceed in a legal manner to reach a legal decision. They may annul in whole or in part the illegal act or decision of the procurement entity or other act or decision bringing the procurement contract into force. They may revise an illegal decision, by the procurement entity or substitute its own decision for the decision or other than the decision bringing the procurement contract into force. So these are options available to the board of the PPA in line with the administrative review of the decision. They could also require the decisions available to them is that they may require the payment of compensation for a reasonable cost incurred by the supplier who submitted the complaint in connection with the procurement proceeding. They may also order that the procurement proceeding be terminated. They may dismiss the complaint and require the payment of compensation for reasonable costs incurred by the procurement entity as a result of the halting of the process. The board shall, within 21 days of starting a review, issue a written decision, concerning the complaint, stating the reason for their decision. So the decision of the board shall be given within 21 days, and the issue of the written decision concerning the complainant, stating the reason for their decision. And the decision of the board and the reason for the decision shall be made part of the procurement proceeding. So these are the various actions available to the board of the Public Procurement Authority anytime they have been an administrative review in respect of a procurement proceeding. Take note of that as we move to the other discussion. So we can now conclude by looking at the processes involved in the disposal of stores, vehicles, and equipment. But to understand this, we need to know the various types of stores of vehicles or equipment that may be disposed. The first type is called the unserviceable stores, where an item of plant and equipment cannot be used for intended purposes in its present condition due to major defects or damage and is beyond repair. So this particular item will be classified exactly as beyond economic repair for this purpose and shall be determined on the basis that repair costs are certified to be more than 50% of the current market price of a new replacement. So we call it unserviceable stock. Then we also have the obsolete stock, where the item is rendered incapable of further effective use by development in technology, incompatible with associated items, or where annual maintenance or breakdown cost is certified to be exceeding 30% of the estimated cost of the new replacement. Then we have what we call surplus stock. These are any store items which have been moved or which are not moved for a period of in excess of 2 years, or an item of plant and equipment which have remained unused for a period of in excess of 1 year, and where no potential use for the item can be envisaged within the entity. So these are the three main stores that may be disposed by an entity: the unserviceable one, the obsolete one, and then the surplus store. Now let's look at the authority to dispose. Now, the act says that the head of the procurement entity shall convene a board of survey comprising the representatives of the department with the unserviceable, obsolete, or surplus stock. Now, they will now meet and then prepare a report on the item, and that report is mainly technical, exactly, and make recommendation on the best method of disposing of the item after the officer in charge has completed the board of survey form. So, what is the board of survey? The board of survey shall be undertaken by at least 3 people, and usually it's a representation of the procurement entity's admin or finance department, a storekeeper or stockholder, and a senior officer from any of the public or private institution knowledgeable of the item to be surveyed. Now, the Board of Survey's recommendation shall be approved by the head of the procurement entity, and the item shall be disposed of as approved. Now, let's look at something. Now, the mode of disposal. By what mode can we use to dispose a public item, such as the obsolete one or serviceable one? Now, we may either use the what we call transfer to other government department or other public entity without financial adjustment. So this is a process where we give it out to other public sector entities without any financial consideration. This is applicable where the asset can be useful or redeployed by the other entity. So the procedure is that the storekeeper shall liaise with the recipient entity for a formal transfer of ownership and removal of the item from their premises. What if there's a sale by public tender? It's another approach could be used to dispose it. So the item with usually an initial cost of 50 million or more must be disposed by a public tender, unless the item is more than 10 years old. This method is used where the estimated value of the asset packaged together is sufficient to justify the cost of conducting the public tender. So what is the procedure? The preparation of a tender document, that is key, a placement of advertisement, very key, receipt and opening of evaluation of tender, very key, and the item will be offered to the highest tenderer, subject to a reserve price. Take note of that. So we can look at the other method, which is the sale by public auction, and this will be where the store have an estimated value of less than 50 million, and also when sufficient time can be assembled for disposal to justify the cost of conducting the auction process. Now, the procedure is that the storekeeper should just request the procurement entity to invite an auctioneer to help facilitate the process. So anything less than 50 million, we may need to auction it. Anything above 50 will go for tender. So take note of that. We could also destroy, dump, or bury the item. So this shall be used where the asset has no residual value and cannot be converted into any other form, which subsequently will give value. So to ensure that destruction or burying is properly executed, it's recommended that a committee of at least 3 people must supervise the process. And the procedure will be that a committee should obtain the approval from the relevant environmental and health agency to ensure that we can be able to dump or destroy the item in line with health and safety considerations. So these are the processes involved in the disposal of unused, as we said, obsolete or unserviceable stocks. We can now look at the determination of market value, which is the conclusion of this. Usually, whenever we want to dispose of an item, it's very important to set a value for it. And the reference point is very important to ensure that we dispose it in line with market conditions. So the most accurate determination of value is where there's always a competitive market that is ready to pay for it. So we look at the competitive market and how much they are willing to pay for it. Or alternatively, we could engage an agent to help us to determine a sufficient value for it. So these are the processes we involve anytime we want to dispose a government store vehicle or equipment. So please take note of this, a very important discussion as we conclude our discussion on public procurement. This is our 4th video on public procurement, and all these discussions are essentially to help you bring a very good understanding of the issues that we've seen under public procurement. So take note of this. There will be further discussions we shall be having, or what we call interactive sessions, to consider the key issues that some of you may seek clarifications on. No doubt we shall have that section to bring your understanding on the essential issues under public world procurement. So for now, thank you so much as we bring conclusion to our discussion on public procurement. See you in our next session. Thank you. Thank you for watching another video from Aspire Professional Consult. For more of these videos and audio lectures, you can join our e-learning program by downloading our app on both Android and iOS. For those of you who want to join our classroom lecture, you can also join us on both weekends and weekday, either at Kwabenya for the weekends and Accra Central at the Hockey Stadium for the weekday. And also, we give you an opportunity to buy books from our published house, that's Aspire Publication, by dialing the following numbers provided on your screen. Thank you, and see you in our next section.